All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of Dungeon Crawlers, where we have author Amy Beatty with her new book, Dragon Ascending, which is the first book in Vanir. Is that right?
Vanir, yeah.
Vanir Dragon series.
To pronounce things differently.
Yeah, that's the one thing about fantasy is you see it how it's spelled, and most often that's not how it's pronounced. But that's okay. That's what's so cool about it.
It's true.
So, Dragon Ascending, an amazing cover, this massive dragon, and I love the fact that it's not a cutesy dragon. I'm not a fan of the cutesy dragon. This dragon looks very menacing, with this poor...
Yeah, they did a great job with it. I'm very happy with how that came out.
Yeah. So, how about I let you give us a little bit of information, without giving away too much, of what Dragon Ascending is.
Okay, well, it's kind of like one of those fairy tales where the hero has to go out and kill the dragon and rescue the missing king so that he can win the hand of the beautiful princess, except in this book, the hero is a dragon, and the king doesn't really want to be rescued, and the dungeon keeper has a secret that's going to change everything.
Okay, so you've taken some of those classic tropes and twisted them around.
I have. It's fun to play with tropes.
Yeah, I like the fact that the hero is a dragon. You're just like,
yes.
I'm throwing that out there.
Dragons. Uh-huh.
And the king that we're supposed to save doesn't really want to be saved. So...
He's not sure he wants to.
What was that?
He's not sure he wants to go home.
Yeah. I mean, I like that because you're putting some conflict in there right away. Because, I mean, we've all played those classic D&D games or read those books where, you know, the hero goes out, saves the maiden or saves whoever he's supposed to, comes home, gets the reward. I mean, and then lives happily ever after, which, well, looking at real life doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's kind of how real life plays out. So you have to kind of wonder, you know, if you take these tropes that we all know how the story goes, and then we kind of play it a little more like real life where stuff doesn't kind of really work out the way that the script is supposed to go, you know, where does it go from there? So I had really a lot of fun with that.
Yeah. So, where did this idea originate from? I mean, everyone has that moment where this idea just kind of pops into being, and then it's like, oh, I gotta write that. Sometimes it's way in the past, sometimes it was just seeing something. What produced this story?
Oh gosh, I don't know if I could even nail it down to one thing.
Okay.
When I first started writing, I wasn't sure if I wanted to write science fiction or fantasy, so I decided to write one of each and see which one I liked best, and it turns out I like both of them, so I'm actually working on two series, one in kind of each vein there. But in fantasy, I guess my love of fantasy goes back really as far as I can remember. My mom used to read fairy tales. We had some wonderful fairy tale books in our house when I was growing up, and my mom was very enthusiastic about books and learning and stories, and I really learned, I think, to love stories from her, but especially fairy tales. And then when I was in third grade, I had a teacher, Mr. York, who read The Hobbit to all of us as a class, and I loved The Hobbit. In fact, I've got my mother sent me some boxes that was mine that she had in her basement a while back, and I found this notebook in there from third grade where we were supposed to write a story of The Hobbit as a poem, and my on for pages and pages of pages retelling the story of The Hobbit in third grade. So I've really loved fantasy since then, and this was back in the 70s. That's how old I am to, date myself. But yeah, and then we did the Lord of the Rings in fourth grade, and the school library had the Chronicles of Prydain and Anne McCaffrey's Dragons, and it just kind of grew from there, kind of with the expansion of the fantasy genre as a whole. And I've loved all the different directions that fantasy has been taking lately. But for me, I guess I'm kind of a classicist at heart or something, because I really love those old fairy tale kinds of stories. And so when I was thinking about what kind of fantasy do I want to write for this book that I'm trying out to see if I wanted to write fantasy, I figured maybe I won't be able to pull it off. Maybe no one but me will ever see it. So really, I'm writing this book for myself. So what do I want to write about? And so for me, it came down to how can I play with those fairy tales that I love and make it, a grown-up story for grown-up people, but play with those fairy tale tropes that kind of live in the background of all of our, folklore and our hearts. And I also have a love of mythology and history. I dabble. I'm not an expert. I don't have education really formally in that area, but I have a lot of interest in learning different mythologies and belief systems. And I was especially interested in the Norse and Scandinavian mythologies that Tolkien kind of pulled his Northern European Germanic folklore that Tolkien pulled his different races from for his world. And so I kind of decided I want to go back and play with those stories before they got filtered through Tolkien. I love all the Tolkien spin-offs too, don't get me wrong, but I kind of wanted to go back before Tolkien and play with the elves and the dwarves and the dragons and just that whole mythology. So it all just kind of grew together from all of that.
No, I like that. I love history, especially ancient history. There seems to come a point, at least for me, like when we hit like the Revolutionary War, where I just lose interest in history, but everything before that is just fascinating to me. The religions that were around there, the art of warfare back then was a lot more. It's definitely bloody, but it was a lot more personable, in my opinion.
It was more personal, more to your face, where you have to actually face up to what it is that you're doing. Now we use drones and we kill people from half a world away.
Yeah, that's exactly it. There are people that just, drone flies in, they see it on a camera, they push a button, the end. Where back then, if they wanted to take out a leader, they had to infiltrate the city and sneak in, and it was definitely in your face type situation. I always found that fascinating, let alone there were so many different cultures that varied, even within a small region of space, which I just found fascinating. So, and then when you kind of pluck some of those out and then put them together, it's amazing. Just like Genghis Khan, for instance, there are more people in the planet that can trace their DNA back to him than anyone else on the entire planet, because he was just so,
prolific.
Yeah, I'll leave it. I don't know if I want to use the word prolific, but yeah,
word.
Yeah, he shared his DNA quite a bit.
Generous, how's that?
Yeah, generous. And I found, I don't know why, but that was just really interesting. He was one of the first people to really use psychological and chemical warfare in a way by launching dead bodies into these cities that he besieged. And
it's really gruesome.
No one had seen that before. And you just have to wonder, where did this idea come from? And so,
I think the people of the past definitely had a different relationship with death than we do now. If you think about it, the childhood mortality rate meant most people who had children had lost more than one. A lot of women died during childbirth. It was just kind of something that you live with, I think. One of the characters in my book, in Dragon Ascending, has kind of an interesting relationship with death too. Mudge, the dungeon keeper, was actually raised in the dungeon from a small child, and so Mudge was a little more casual about death, I think, than most people in our culture would be. But one of Mudge's hobbies is dissecting animals and people who have died recently, and Mudge will pay for the guards to bring down executed convicts or animals or whatever that they find, so they can be dissected, because Mudge just has a really scientific mind and an interest in such things and isn't bothered by death. Had a lot of fun with Mudge.
Yeah. That's really cool that you kind of bring in, even though you have like the fantasy element, you have magic in that, you still have that scientific element, and I think that lends a lot of things too. I know a lot of people out there really like Brandon Sanderson's books, and because of his magic systems, and he lends kind of a scientific element to those things, especially like in Mistborn. There's a lot of physics applied in there. So I think when we have the scientific and the mystical, it really kind of blends well, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I think that you can play those two off each other in a lot of interesting ways. I think that making the magic more scientific, like Brandon Sanderson does, is definitely an interesting way to play with it. And I think when he started writing those books, I think fantasy kind of needed a kick in the pants like that to make people kind of break out of the box and think about, fantasy differently, think about magic differently. But I think you can also contrast the science and the magic because, in a lot of, in our modern world, magical thinking is kind of frowned upon and science is put up on a little bit more of a pedestal. And so we see a little more of a contrast between the two rather than a blending. But it's interesting that you can play it both ways with that. And I love to see how different authors decide to handle that. I think my magic is a lot less scientifically explained than Sanderson's.
Okay.
It's got a structure to it, but it's a different take.
Okay, so it's a different take than the traditional magic we see of fireballs and lightning, like Gandalf.
It's a little more kind of each of the races kind of has their own inborn magic, but it's different. So dragons can ascend, is what I'm calling it. They shapeshift from human form to dragon form. So when they're in dragon form, they've ascended, and that's just kind of an ability, a magical ability that they have because they're dragons. And then the elves, the Elfkin, I decided to call them Elfkin because they're also not quite stereotypical Tolkien type elves. They have a metamorphic life cycle where instead of being born like humans, they lay eggs and they go through a kind of insect-like life stage where they're nymphs, and they're kind of scary in nymph form, but people don't see them all that often. And then they have they kind of pupate and have a metamorphic stage, and their adult form looks a lot more like humans. So they're not like traditional fantasy elves exactly, but they are magical creatures, and in some ways they are kind of like those elves. They like the traditional fantasy elves. They live in the forest, and they're a little standoffish from humans and like to think of themselves as better than everybody else.
Okay.
Kind of elitist, but they're so I call them Elfkin. They're a little, and they can make wisp lights. They can transform things, and they have a glamour that's kind of an illusion magic. And so it's magic that's born into them, though it's not something that is externally manipulated. And so, like, elves can't turn into dragons, and dragons do this glamour magic that elves can do. But each race has its own forms of magic. So the science that would be surrounding magic in that kind of a world, I think, would be the science of explaining the magic. Like, we use science to explain nature. We don't invent nature through science generally. generally speaking, although we can manipulate it more now than ever before in history.
Yeah.
But we don't really invent it. We just change the building blocks that already exist. And the science that would surround magic in my kind of a world, in this kind of a world, would be more exploratory and explanatory like that.
No, I like that. So, we have the main character, who is, and we have the the dungeon master. It's kind of got a secret, and we've got the king that's not really sure if he wants to go home. Who is the protagonist? I mean, who is the big cheese villain in this book, and why?
Oh, the protagonist. Well, so back, the king that's missing is the king of the dragons, and so Edric, the main character, and he's off to find the king of the dragons and return him home. And in the king's absence, there's a black dragon called Nidhogg, who is threatening to usurp the throne. He's going to marry the queen and take over the throne, and Edric needs to get the king back before that happens. So he's the main villain.
Okay. No, it's simple, it's easy, and again, another trope.
It's a fairy tale trope kind of villain, but there are lots of other smaller twists and turns that happen in the middle on the way back. So, yeah, it's kind of this fairy tale structure that you would expect, but then a lot of the small things in between.
Yeah. No, I like that. You've got the large story arc, and then you've got the smaller ones that kind of build up throughout that larger one. And that's one thing that's really exciting and fun about a lot of books, especially the ones I read, is I like where the momentum is moving forward, that it's not an easy quest. It's not like they jumped on a horse and, or on an eagle and just flew to Mount Doom.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are like, well, why'd they just jump off the eagles? But then you wouldn't be interested. It wouldn't be that thrilling or exciting of a story if it was just easy. There has to be a challenge for us to, well, one, to believe it, and then two, to really enjoy it. And I think that's all because of our humanity, and we like things difficult as much as we say to the contrary.
I think things to have difficult. We like to look back and say, look what we overcame. We like the champions who fight through the difficulties and come out on top. We don't like the people who just say, oh yeah, I went to the store and I bought groceries, I came home. That's not a story that anybody cares to hear.
Yeah.
Everything just went smoothly, But if you say I went to the store to buy groceries and I got a flat tire on my car, and then this guy tried to mug me, and then my credit card got refused, and make it an adventure. Anything can be an adventure, but adventures, well, one of the characters in my book points out that adventures are more fun to hear about than they are to live through.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of those hard times in our lives, when we're going through them, you just think you're going to die. But once you're through it and you look back, like, those are the best stories that you tell about your life. You're like, look what happened, and I lived through it, and everybody goes, wow,
Yeah.
Those are the stories that we like to hear.
No, I agree. There have been multiple times where, I've been around my kids and say one of their friends does something really stupid, and there's like, well, how'd you break your arm? Like my son, he's like, I tripped over a pile of dirt, and they're like, that's dumb. You didn't get in a fight. It was some big bully that had a baseball bat, and he went to swing it, and you stuck your arm up to block. It's like, no, I tripped over a pile of dirt. Yeah. Everyone wants kind of that epic story where it's really difficult and you have a struggle, because the plain and mundane is just not that exciting.
Yeah. Well, one of the advantages I found to working with those common tropes that we already know how the story is supposed to go is that you don't have to spend time explaining what the goal is, or explaining how the story's what the how the character intends the story to work out.
Yeah.
You just say, oh, it's the guy is usurping the throne and he has to get the king back, and everybody knows what to expect. And I don't have to waste time telling that part of the story. I can just tell, all of those challenges that came up along the way. So I find that I really liked working with those tropes for that reason, because it's a time saver.
No, it is, and that's kind of what the tropes are there for, is to help save us time, because people have put in that work. It's like, you don't have to go through the exhausting detail of describing a dragon anymore. You just say the word dragon, and everyone already has that impression or what it should look like in their mind. And then if your dragons are a little bit different, then you spend that time. But most often than not, we just say the word dragon. It's fire breathing, it's massive, it's got claws and fangs and wings, and we're done.
Yeah.
But even though, you throw in the word, let's say a chimera in there, not a lot of people know what those look like, so you have to kind of give those detail.
You have to spend a little more time on it, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the difficulties I found with challenges that I found with writing the science fiction was I have aliens, and, you say alien, and there's not a common trope that people go to and say, oh, I know what that means. It might be little gray people, it might be giant, insectile, something that wants to eat your head. It could be, any of a million different things, because we don't have a common cultural image of what alien means. But with dragons, you do. You can say the guy's a dragon. He shapeshifts into dragon form, and people have instantly a picture of that. And different people's dragons might look a little different in their head, but like you say, they all have wings. They breathe fire. They have claws. I mean, there are some exceptions. There are dragons in Chinese culture that don't even have legs or wings, but they fly, and so there are some exceptions. But generally speaking, if you're talking fantasy and you dragon, you don't have to explain it much more than that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and you just throw out the hero's journey, and people are like, okay, I know what's going on. Yeah. So that is the wonderful thing about tropes. They are that time saver, but at the same time, as you're building your story, especially in fantasy and even in science fiction, you can spend years building your world and everything just so your story. You can start writing your story and it's just right, and that's painstaking. I know, I've done it, and it's so much easier just to use the trope, because then you can jump in and finally get the writing done.
Yes.
Like you have your elves, but they're a little different. But people still can accept that.
And you do have to be careful with using tropes, because if you use too many tropes and the tropes all play out the way that we all expect them to, then it's boring.
Yeah.
You go, I've read this book 6 billion times. I don't want to read another version of this book. But a lot of times when you don't want to read another version, you're perfectly willing to read another take on that story. How many Cinderella stories are there in how many cultures all around the world?
Yeah.
Because we all like that rags to riches story, but it's not about does she make the rags to riches journey, because we know it's a Cinderella story, so of course she does. The question then becomes, how does she get from rags to riches? How does this one get from rags to riches? Mm-hmm. How is the stepmother different in this story than she was in the other story, and how does that affect how the story plays out? So you do have to be careful using tropes as heavily as maybe I have, but then part of the fun is twisting the tropes and turning them on their head a little bit and having things maybe not end the way you expected them to end, that kind of thing.
Well, and that's one of the best parts of storytelling, in my opinion, is when you set the story up, you have used those tropes like you've said, the reader already in their mind knows how this story is going to end, and then you yank the rug out from underneath them, and it's a completely different ending. One of my favorite movies, The Prestige, did exactly that. at the very end. And I was just shocked because I was like, okay, I know exactly how this is going to end. And so I just kind of sat back like, okay, I'll just watch the rest because I know what's going to happen. And then when that didn't happen, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And I've talked to several other people, and that's how they feel too. If a book can do that, that book immediately catapults up to their favorite.
It's true. And one of the things that I have really enjoyed hearing back from my readers is there is a plot twist in, I think it's chapter 11 in Dragon Ascending. But, don't go peek. But so very few people have seen it coming. Some have seen it coming. And I try to write it so that it has little hints and kind of insider jokes so that if you've caught on to the twist that's coming, or if you think that you have, it's fun still. Sometimes if you figure out the twist in advance, then it's kind of boring when you get there. And I tried to write it so that people would say, aha, yes, I was right, instead of, I knew that was happening. Tried to put some things in the early parts of the story that would be fun, even if people had figured it out, and that would make it fun for people who went back and read it again after they got to that part or after they finished the book. And I have loved hearing reactions from readers when they get to that part, whether they saw it coming or not. Just the level of, I love this book for this reason because of this twist. It's just been really gratifying. It makes me feel like I managed to pull off what I was trying to do, at least for more readers than not.
Yeah. No, it's the greatest feeling in the world when, you've spent all this time writing this book. The book is done. It's put out to the world. You have no clue if people are going to like it. So you're kind of like hunkering down like in a bunker, like, okay, I'm ready for the mud to start flinging at me. But then someone says they love it, and you're like, what? And it's kind of like you poke your head out, and you're like, really? And then someone else says they like it, and you kind of stand up a little bit taller and taller, and it's almost like, this kind of plant growing up into the sun. And it's one of the greatest feelings ever.
Like, you can't make everybody happy. You just can't. There are going to be people, who read it and don't like it, and that's okay. I get it. I don't have every book either. But just some of the strength, some of the delight of the reaction. I got a message from a woman this morning that said she got the book from the library yesterday and she had to stay up till 5 o'clock this morning to finish it, and she couldn't put it down. And I was like, wow, that's what you're as an author. Well, not that you're like ruining people's sleep patterns or anything.
No, it's it's cool.
It's so awesome. And then yesterday I was talking to one of the neighbors who went out and bought it because, he's a friend and a neighbor. And he said, I've only read the first chapter, but oh my gosh, the first chapter, you put them in the dungeon and they're all going to die. And usually books don't get to that point until, like 3/4 of the way through. Where do you go from there? And he was so excited to get to figure out where do you go from we're all in a dungeon and we're going to die in the first chapter. So, you get these reactions from readers and you're just like, even, maybe it's not perfect, but clearly I pulled something off for that person. That person's going to come along for the ride and we can have fun together.
Yeah, you definitely set the hook on that one. So now that the book is out, you're having success with it. People are actually excited about it. Where do you go from here? Because it sounds like you're already working on another project.
Yeah, I've actually got a couple of projects in the works, and it's a little bit hard to balance it all around real life, which is one of the things that I'm kind of in the process of learning is how to juggle it all and balance. The book's only been out for a little less than a month. It came out October 2nd. And so I don't actually get to see any sales numbers until like January just because of how the publishing industry works. But just from the feedback I've gotten, it's all been pretty positive, and I'm very happy with how things are going. Hopefully it'll pick up even more and just grow. But I am working on book 2 for that series. It's been a little bit slower than I had hoped. It turns out book 2 is a little bit harder.
Yes, it is.
To write in book, because I've set expectations in book 1 that people want to see carried out in book 2, and so taking those threads and twisting them into a new story, it has been interesting. But I feel like I'm solidly on the road for that one now, and hopefully it won't take too much longer to finish.
No, I've been on that same road with you. Second book was a lot more difficult because you've kind of left these threads open that you need to connect back onto with this book, but at the same time you're wanting to develop the story more, and it was a lot more difficult for me writing the second book than the first.
Yeah, I'm finding that too. I have to say, I was kind of expecting to get a little more practice in before things took off. I'm super excited that it's all happening as fast as it is, and I know that there are people out there going, "Oh wow, cry! What a problem to cry about." But I was kind of expecting to have 3 or 4 books to practice on before it all got out in the public where people could read it. But so I still feel in a lot of ways like a beginner. Still figuring things out, like book 2. How do you tackle a book 2? But yeah, so that's the main thing I'm working on writing right now. And then I have another book, the science fiction one, is coming out probably in a couple of weeks. It's not on as tight of a production schedule as the other one is through a different publisher. But book 1 of the Viper series will be coming out too, fairly soon. So that's exciting.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask the question, how do you balance between going back and forth between a fantasy and a sci-fi novel? Because they're vastly different beasts.
Well, they are. And part of it is, when a writer part of my brain starts getting burned out on one, I can switch over to the other one, and it's like fresh territory to play in. I haven't been staring at that one for a couple of months, and I can, I can step back and see better where I need to pull things a little tighter, or, go back to my outline and do a little revising before I go ahead or something like that. But it helps with the burnout for me to kind of switch back and forth.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a balancey thing that I'm still learning, and I don't know.
Hopefully you will find the balance, and it won't be a problem anymore.
Well, there are sort of similarities because I'm the one writing both of them, and writers have themes that come up in all of their stories, or there's several of their stories, depending on what was going on in their life at the time when they were writing or whatever. Mm-hmm. But so both the fantasy one and the science fiction one have maybe a little more focus on the relationships between the characters than is typical in the genres. So I would say that's a commonality between the two. I've found that there's kind of this idea that science fiction and fantasy are male genres. And yeah, there are some women out there who like them. And, there are a lot of women out there who like them. I think that there's a perception problem a little bit there.
Yeah.
But I think that more women would like it if, with a little, tweak in the female reader direction. I hate to generalize like that and stereotype because, everybody's different. There are men who love reading romance novels, and there are women who really get into the, military fiction and stuff. These things are stereotyped per gender, but I don't like to generalize, but there is some truth to the generalization. I do think that women like to read stories that have more relationship drama in them, and men like to read stories, speaking in those vast generalizations, they like to read more action. And so I feel like when I read fantasy or lot of fantasy focuses really heavily on the action and not so much on the romance or the relationships between parent and child or the friendships and that kind of thing. And so I wanted to play that up a little bit more, to kind of differentiate my style, I guess, a little from just the generic and the genre, and to try and pull some more of my women friends in that don't think that they like those genres because they're male genres. And I've had some good response back from female friends on that too. So
Nice. No, I agree with that. So we're running out of time. Where can the listeners find you so they can keep abreast of when's your next book coming out, or book signings, or other interviews?
Yeah, probably the best place would be my website, which is www.amybeatty.com. And it's Beatty. So some people have a hard time spelling that. But I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and social media places. But probably the best central hub would be my website, and then that'll point you to the other places. I have an email sign up on there. It's actually kind of a little group that we're calling the Guild. So you can sign up for the Guild and you'll get periodic emails. I don't really have a newsletter that goes out regularly. I send updates probably 4 times a year, and then if there's news, I'll send it out through the email list, and like cover reveals, then the email list gets cover reveals first and things like that when I can swing it. So, sign up. I will keep in touch.
Okay. So for those of you that are listening and have been listening, check out Dragon Ascending. It's published by Immortal Works, and pick up your copy today if you already haven't. Also, if you have read it or find out that you do enjoy this fantasy, you can always check out her upcoming sci-fi novel, which will be coming out soon. So, again, thank you for coming on the show and taking time to talk about the book. And go ahead.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, no problem. So, everyone, run out, grab a copy, because that's the best way to support an author, as well as giving honest reviews. And with that said, we'll catch you next time.
Dungeon Crawler.